Okay, well, item 10 is safeguarding vulnerable people from extremism. Would you like to introduce yourselves, Nick? Thank you. Yeah.
So I'm Nick Adams, Superintendent based within the North East Counter-Terrorism Unit. A role I have there as the Regional Prevent Coordinator, looking or overseeing the delivery of the policing aspects of Prevent for West Yorkshire, but also for the other 6 forces within the North East Counter-Terrorism Unit region.
Okay, just before I ask you to comment on on your report, again, there is a cover sheet that briefly explains the reason why this is in the police and crime plan, and it was certainly something that was raised with us through the public consultation last year, and as we know, sadly, there have been a number of national and international acts of terrorism. Only too recently, of course, in London, where the tragedy unfolded with the murder of a police officer and members of the public. And clearly, this is something that is very much on people's minds, and that's why it is important we have updates to what our approach is here in West Yorkshire. So over to you, Nick. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll summarise some of the key points that I've put in the report then. The first page really just gives an overview, as we discussed the last time I spoke at this meeting, in relation to the role of Prevent Policing and the way in which we discharge our functions to safeguard people, including the use of the Partnership Channel Programme. The whole element of Prevent obviously sits under the government's contest strategy. We're currently awaiting a review of that strategy, which we had anticipated would have been released by now, but likely because of the general election that's going to be into June. And alongside that, we'll hopefully for the first time, because I think it's something that across the regions we think would be really valuable, we'll see the publication of data to the public and to our communities that will give people a much greater sense, particularly around transparency of the work that is undertaken by Prevent, and hopefully demystify some of the work and highlight, in actual fact, the fantastic work that is undertaken to keep people safe. We've seen over the last 12 months in particular, but certainly the back end of last year, real focus for Prevent Policing around disrupting individuals who may be being drawn into extremism and seeking to radicalise others. And I'll explain as I go through the report why that I think is becoming even more important in this year. We have, to underpin everything that we've done now, got a really clear understanding of our own data. So when that publication that I mentioned it goes live, we will have a really strong understanding across West Yorkshire, across the 5 districts, where our referrals come from, where some of our gaps and weaknesses are, where there are opportunities to do things better, where there is some really good work and good practice that we can more publicly share. We've seen since the launch of the Counter-Terrorism Security Act in 2015, which brought about the Prevent duty and a requirement for all statutory organisations to embed Prevent in their frontline delivery. We have seen significant increases in referrals from partner organisations. Surprisingly, in some respects, despite the messaging that goes out in the media from teachers and schools, the vast majority across West Yorkshire of our referrals come from schools, around about 60%. Much smaller proportion from higher education, further education colleges, but we see some of our most significant threat emanating from HEFE colleges. And that's around about 10% of our referrals. What continues to disappoint me and continues to concern me is that we only get around about similar proportion, 10% of our referrals from local government organisations. So their functions sat outside of education provides just 10% of our referrals. And given the volume of colleagues working within frontline public sector roles, within local government, given the volume of interactions that they have with the public, I think there's still big opportunities there for us to work with partners and to increase their confidence, their knowledge, their understanding of the risks to ensure that we get reporting. And again, I'll come to that in just a second. So we have, as I said, got a really good handle on our data, where our referrals come from, where our gaps are. That information is now provided to strategic groups at districts in order that they can make informed decisions about the local strategy and to drive actions through the tactical groups at each district. And across the team, we now have 5 district-based teams embedded within local districts, each sergeant led, something that we were only in the process of implementing when we last met. And each of those teams now is holder of responsibility through a structure that I refer to as devolved to delegated leadership, where each of those teams takes thematic responsibility across the whole of West Yorkshire for certain areas. So where we are now is in a position where we are really driving forward a number of areas of work, and some of the projects that I'll touch on in a minute will cover that. In terms of the threats that we face, the threat from international terrorism remains our highest priority. We've seen individuals who have sought to travel to Syria and terrorist acts that have been perpetrated overseas. But the influence of international terrorists, their reach into the UK, was obviously brought into stark contrast again in the Westminster attack only a few weeks ago. But that continues to be a really significant threat for us. The radicalisation of individuals, either directly or indirectly, encouraging people to perpetrate attacks on the streets of the UK is a really significant problem for us. And that is an area where only communities and the partners that work within this area will have the greatest opportunity to provide the solution for us. The radicalisation of individuals linked to the far right and extreme right wing continues to be a significant problem right across the whole of the North East, but within West Yorkshire we see a proportionate number of referrals to the community makeup within each of our districts. We have taken the national lead for National Action, which is the prescribed extreme right-wing terrorist group, and we have led nationally on the prevent planning around targeting and challenging that group. Within both of those areas, and across all areas of terrorism, but within both of those areas, the most significant risk we face at the moment is from lone actors of the type we saw in the case of Thomas Mair, who murdered Joe Cox, the type we saw in London and Westminster very recently. Individuals who are radicalised because they have in their lives a number of factors that make them vulnerable to going out and perpetrating an evil act, often misguided, sometimes with mental health conditions, but generally because they have latched onto information, propaganda, narratives that are out there. The risk around lone actors is a really significant one, and it will only be tackled through community confidence and through communities and families coming forward. And one of our lowest areas of reporting is from communities and families. Partners working together will have to tackle not only these local threats, but also now the returnees from Syria and from overseas, and the risks that they will pose for many months, if not years, within the local communities that they will potentially move back into. Particularly when you think about young children, some have been born, some have been raised from a very young age over in war zones, some have been trained in battle tactics, have become battle hardened because they've been fighting. These are children that left from our primary schools potentially, who will come back as very damaged teenagers, but also individuals who are very dangerous. So the work of partners to come together in order to be able to mitigate those risks, to provide the support that people need where support's appropriate, to make sure that we're identifying and launching investigations, potentially arresting and detaining people where that is the right course of action will be absolutely critical. The work that then we're undertaking to try and mitigate those risks across the county. The first one is really to build up the trust and confidence of communities to come forward, because as I said, without that information intelligence we cannot defeat this problem. In the report I've outlined a number of radio interviews, newspaper interviews have been undertaken since the start of this year, and coming up just this week I've got a Radio 4 documentary that's being developed by the former lead reviewer of counter-terrorism legislation, who's going to be running this documentary, but I've been invited to participate in that, and I have a meeting about that later this week, so that will give an opportunity again for us to get some really clear messages out and to reinforce the work that we've been doing I've also been invited to write an article this week for the Urban Echo, which is a newspaper that reaches our Muslim communities with a really strong 20 to 30,000 readership. So some opportunities there to get out some messaging to people, to reinforce what we're doing, to tackle some of the stereotypes and some of the negative and false messages that are out there. We've also built a strong alliance with the Northwest, where they have a mental health hub, and starting next month we will have a dedicated mental health nurse working with the Northeast CTU to review cases that we have ongoing, to look for opportunities to ensure that mental health partners are doing more to support people who may be vulnerable to radicalisation because of certain mental health conditions they have. We have research undertaken across a number of thematic areas, one in particular being undertaken by a PhD student, focuses clearly on the religious narratives that are driving radicalisation. That student is some way into their research now. I did mention it the last time we met, and he's coming to my next team training day this Friday to present some of his findings to the team, so they can start to understand and be better informed about what to look for, the conversations to have with people. We also have a range of work being undertaken for frontline partners and frontline staff, and just to kind of give you a very, very quick flavour in summary of that. We've already done some work for call handlers, so they recognise the signs to look for when people are making calls, and they have an online toolkit to follow. We have 6 training events being planned for this summer for frontline, neighbourhood, ward manager and PCSO colleagues across West Yorkshire. They will be targeted to our areas of greatest risk and vulnerability. Officers have been receiving local briefings from their Prevent officers throughout the course of this year. 2 weeks ago we ran a senior leadership workshop which was attended by colleagues from the intelligence service. That was to raise awareness in more detail about some of the issues I've highlighted, and to ensure that we have the right level of strategic buy-in. We've currently got ongoing training for custody officers and custody nurses to ensure that signs that are identified in custody suites are picked up and acted upon. In a similar way to Warren described, we have a mobile data app being developed. It's currently in I think it's a technical term, but a coding stage to get the software ready. And in the background, we have been developing the content to go on there. That will cut right across the run, hide, tell, stay safe messaging, as well as spotting signs of radicalisation, the risks and vulnerabilities around lone actors and how they might present, officers staying safe at scenes where there are potentially chemicals, a whole plethora of counter-terrorism risks that will then be available to officers to research, to follow online toolkits, etc., to assist them in their duties. We've already produced a video interview that I did for the fire service that goes alongside their online training programme to bring that to life, to really reinforce some of the key risks that they face, and we're currently working with the Yorkshire Ambulance Service to do something similar for them, to ensure that the online training that tries to reach the largest number of staff and has a really a sort of powerful, current, up-to-date message attached to it. And finally, so we're currently working with neighbourhood policing colleagues within West Yorkshire to ensure that we play a really active part in the development of the force's strategic reassurance plan, recognising the role, the impact that Prevent has on communities, on providing reassurance, working with Superintendent Marianne Hewison to make sure that as her work develops, that we are an integral part of that. I'll probably leave that there in summary. Hopefully it just gives a flavour in terms of where we are, some of the risks that we're currently facing, and the work that we've got ongoing to tackle that.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that update and highlighting the current situation and some of the work that's been undertaken, which is good to hear. I have some questions to follow up. I mean, you mentioned the biggest threat being this business of lone actors, and you know we've seen it. It's really just to ask how are you, the police and our partners, using the sort of Prevent strategy to try and respond to that threat as best you can?
I think the starting point is that the Prevent strategy research into lone actors. What we see with lone actor attacks, every single one is different. The factors that have influenced that individual are different. So we're learning as a network across the country all the time. We do now understand the critical factors that are generally prevalent in lone actor attacks. By their very nature, these individuals tend not to be linked into formalised networks, they're not part of an organised plan, and therefore it becomes very difficult for the police and security services to identify plots and to disrupt them. So hence when I spoke earlier, talked very clearly about the solution to this problem lies within communities, within families, within those frontline partners, whether they are fire officers going in somebody's home to do a safety check, whether it's an ambulance transport driver or a paramedic going into somebody's house to pick them up and take them into hospital, whether it's a housing officer, to ensure that all frontline staff understand these risks. So some of the things I touched on with partners will deliver some of that. The other area particularly is around mental health and the mental health vulnerabilities that we often see prevalent. And we have undertaken some research across all of our cases over the last 12 months to identify where there are mental health vulnerabilities. We're currently working with NHS England to develop some revised processes and policies that would hopefully influence the opportunities for people to access help at an earlier stage. We have built a whole area of research around lone actors into the current counter-terrorism local profiles, which are the documents that inform the strategic thinking at each district level. There is a toolkit that's contained within that around the factors that contribute to lone actors and a number of strategic actions for each district, which are now being driven through the silver tactical groups to ensure that all frontline partners have got access to and are informed about this, the risk around lone actors.
And you're confident that our neighbourhood policing teams are plugged into that, because clearly it has to be a two-way street in terms of, yes, intelligence that you or the security services may need to act upon, and the right information then being available to our local frontline officers to understand the impact of some actions that may be carried out in a particular neighbourhood or community.
It's a piece of work that's very much ongoing. We've recently updated our training for the new recruits, so they've got a much better brief on this now, and the training that I spoke of, the 6 sessions that will be targeted across frontline neighbourhood officers and our key wards will have this updated information in. One of the challenges for us is that since 2015, when the main threat was all about people travelling out to Syria, the signs and issues that frontline practitioners have been asked to look for by the raising awareness of training, the RAP training that's been delivered by organisations, isn't quite meeting the needs of the current risks. And that's something that concerns me, and the nature of referrals that we get are all around people's concerns about travel generally, or things that are being said. And actually, as we've learned through the lone actor research, often the risks are far more nuanced than that. So updating the training through our partnership forums, both at force level and at district level, is going to be critical to the success of that in terms of updating people, their understanding and their expectations about what they need to refer and why. The real risk is delay in getting that information. The first snippet of information from somebody might be, in the case of Westminster, the hiring a vehicle 10 days before the attack. So that window of opportunity to piece together things that aren't going right in somebody's life and to intervene is really, really small in lots of cases.
Okay, thanks. You touched on this, but obviously we've heard about the problems within the prison service, and one of the issues there has been around potential radicalisation of prisoners, or extremism. What's your view on the partnerships we have with the prison service regarding sharing of information and identifying any of the risks?
Within the CT network, there is a whole piece of work ongoing at the moment around prison intelligence and enhancing prison intelligence. and that will hopefully feed into the really strong relationships that we've already got with the prison service.
Okay, thanks for that. And then you touched on the wider duty of our partners around the Prevent, and of course the role of the channel panels, and it's really just to get your take or your take, David, around what you see as the ideal role or best role for the police within that process.
Well, I think first and foremost, obviously channel is just one aspect of Prevent, and you've already touched upon the fact that as our understanding of overseas terrorism and indeed more local terrorism continues to develop, then so does that programme need to also change, which touches upon the training issue that you talked about. We're actually hosting one of 7 national pilots to try and work out and assess what the future involvement and role is of police and partners as we move forward. Nick's touched upon the fact that we're still at the very early stages at the moment of getting external agency referrals, which I agree with what Nick's assessment is, that 10% doesn't feel like a great deal at this moment in time, but it is still very early days. I just think we've got to continue to work together to work out coordination, how intelligence flows work, how the referrals best support the needs of the individual, because again, you look at the individual cases that take place, you look at the age range of people involved in some of this activity, you look at the family circumstances. That's why Channel, I think, is so important, because it delivers a bespoke option of approaches to be able to deal with that particular person. We'll wait and see how the pilot evolves. I don't think it's probably best to go into too much detail at this moment in time. Yeah. Suffice to say that we are involved in that pilot.
Okay. Thanks for that. And just finally, obviously interested to hear about the development of the app for staff, and obviously you've commented on that, and we've, to a great or lesser extent, sort of explored some of this territory over the past couple of years. And it'd be good to sort of link in with you around how this is going to be sort of rolled out, and if there's anything we can sort of look at from a more of a public-facing type app that might be open to sort of development as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We've already spoken to some of the other partners, ambulance service, fire service, looking at local authorities where there are opportunities to use the app or a version of the app that will work on other Android devices to enable people to access that sort of information that I've touched on earlier. I think will be so critical. So we have got support from National Counter-Terrorism Policing Headquarters. We are leading the way with this work. There's nowhere else in the country yet developing at the pace we are. And they are keen to also support that as potentially as a national project, which I think will again then bring benefits into West Yorkshire in terms of that investment and ensuring that we're at the forefront of getting this sort of tool rolled out to officers and to frontline colleagues to hopefully to increase the volume of information that we can receive, that we can then assess and identify those that are vulnerable and need help.
But this is very much an operational tool rather than something that may be developed into something more public-facing.
At this moment it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Partly because previously Wi-Fi have had some support in terms of funding to look at what a public-facing app might look like.
Absolutely, and at the moment, of course, the debate rages on, doesn't it, around the social media companies, if you like, and what is posted on their platforms, etc., etc. And I think all this, it's all part of that wider debate, might be around what is the responsibilities of those companies, and what can they do technically and feasibly. But also it's that counter narrative that is probably missing at the moment. Not just here, but countrywide.
I think the key here is that prevention is absolutely the way forward. Irrespective of whatever the programme is called, it's about making sure that we get in as early as possible into individuals who just might, end up becoming radicalised. The answer absolutely is within the communities, because in particular in the case of lone actors, Nick has already very carefully outlined that it's very difficult to be able to get sufficient information and intelligence that allows us then to make those early interventions possible. But this is about recognising when people's characters start to change, people's behaviour starts to change, and often it's those who are the closest to these individuals who actually could help us to help them and help the communities prevent individuals from becoming radicalised in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And just to say, I mean, we of course we are looking at work. We are doing some work with University of Bradford at the moment, for example, around looking at the triggers for extremism, radicalisation, and obviously we'll be looking to host some joint consultation events around this as well. So we appreciate the work that is being done, and of course the role of you and your colleagues, Nick, at the counter-terrorism unit in West Yorkshire. So and of course, Russ, you recently gave quite a thorough update to the regional collaboration board of the 4 Yorkshire and Humber forces, which I think was well received in terms of that information. So thanks very much for that update.